projects to upgrade treatment plants across North America. Nick is also part of the Winnipeg Metropolitan Region's team working on the Plan 2025 for regional growth and economic development. Stantec's role on the region plan is to assess water supply and wastewater treatment capacities. The information is intended to support near and long-term plans on land use and community servicing strategies to maximize existing assets and resources. So Nick has let me know that he's willing to answer questions and to stay on a little bit longer. So if you do have any questions and it doesn't quite fit into within the presentation, Nick has graciously said that he's willing to stay on a little bit longer to answer some of those questions. So please join me in bringing Nick on to talk about circularity. Thank you, Nick.
Thank you for the wonderful introduction. I'm just going to set up my presentation here, so 1 minute and we'll get right into it. There we go. Can you see the screen there? Very good. Yeah, well, thank you. I'm going to jump right into this. What we're talking about is a circular economy and for sustainable reasons. And unfortunately, wastewater is such a bad term. It really is a raw resource, and we need to look at it from a resource standpoint so that it can be utilized as best as possible without demands on other resources. Okay, now, starting with the safety moments, and this has been a concern for all of us, is what about COVID in the manures and sludges and what we deal with and how do we handle that? Well, there was a blue ribbon panel put together by the Water Environment Federation that looked explicitly at the transmissibility of the COVID virus and the survival in waste streams. Now, the key takeaway from here is that properly managed wastewater systems, sludge, and biosolids, when it's stabilized properly, are very low risk. In fact, they couldn't even quantify it was so low, but they did put out a disclaimer that it was very low risk. Now, for that reason, like many of the systems that are in wastewater treatment plants are to protect public health. The use of chlorine or other disinfectants for the treated effluent, as well as the thermal processes used to inactivate sludge as it turns into biosolids, so it's safe to use and put back out on the fields. So the short message here is the residuals that have been properly treated from wastewater treatment plants are safe to use. Now let's get into the crux. Well, we're growing at a very rapid pace around the world. In 2015, we can see that around 75% of the world's resources were going to these major cities with 5 million people or more. That's 3/4 of the demand of the world located in these large cities. That was in 2015. And these cities are growing and the demands are getting bigger. The resource chains are going to buckle. We're looking at how can we get the foodstuffs and other important materials to these locations while not starving out other parts of the planet on this. We're looking at a crisis situation here soon that if we do not start looking at how to use our resources better, we will end up in a shortfall, which will then create a whole number of issues globally. So the forecast here is we're developing at a very rapid pace, and can we supply the demand? Now, as a point that we were talking about here earlier, let's de-link economics from resources. We've always talked about supply and demand, but when you don't have enough resources, there's a whole other issue that can develop. Now, fortunately, the economics have grown very well. We've done quite well in North America. We're talking about advanced technologies, some specialized material we need to pull out of the mines to make the chips that have to go with this. We've got lots of natural gas and oil and hydropower to generate electricity. Our cities have grown. We're putting in more green space. However, what we're is if we get into the urban sprawl, we take productive land out of production. So we're beginning to see densification in city centers. Let's go up rather than out, so we can preserve these green spaces. Global commerce. I'm sure we all shop at Amazon and realize how much it's being shipped around the world. These containers, There's just so much goods moving around, and you have to think about all the energy and fuels that are being used to manufacture and move these products around. And lastly, and closest to home here, is intensive agriculture. There is more and more demand for foodstuffs. Manitoba, Saskatchewan, the prairies, we're in a very unique situation where we do have the ability to grow, but how much can we supply? How much can we grow without damaging the environment? And unfortunately, what we're seeing now is the urbanization impacts of this intensive resource demands and products that we're delivering. Our air now, we're talking about carbon taxes. We've put this out, we're talking about climate change and how that's factoring into it. Excessive nutrients getting into our waterways and turning them green, fouling them for other habitat in the flora and fauna. We're now looking at farmland being overworked. It is become a desert. You add in there a drought like we're experiencing this year. That puts a tremendous stress on our abilities to supply foods. And lastly, mountains and mountains of resources going into landfills of waste. We cannot continue to do this. Our resources are being consumed at exponential rates. Now, this also comes down to a discussion about packaging. How much packaging should we be having for our foodstuffs? Should we be going in bulk, or should we be going down to a different kind of distribution system? It was quite interesting when I was listening to the news the other day, and they're saying that the price point of what people can afford, so what they're actually is reducing the size of, say, a box of Shreddies that you buy, which used to be twice the content, but the packaging has stayed the same, but the content has reduced. So, and I'm not trying to point out that particular brand, it's just I'm giving an example here that we're using the same packaging, but for less product. So we have to start thinking about that in terms of its implication as well. Now, one of my favorite sayings here is from Albert Einstein is that problems cannot be solved at the same level of awareness that created them. Keep doing what you're doing, keep getting what you're getting. That in itself is problematic. We did not have the foresight to realize some of the things that we're doing today have such great implications, and to unwind them or take a different path has to be done at a higher level of enlightenment and looking towards the future. I was trying to find the origin to this, waste not, want not. It actually goes back to the 1500s. So you think about it, that's 500 years old in terms of how long this expression was. The less we waste, the less we lack in the future. And if you think about back in the 1500s, they did not have the supply chains we had. So when they ran out of things, they literally ran out of things. Now, fast forward the clock 500 years, this expression has been true through all the centuries of what we're talking about. So we need to start very much focusing on less waste, more productive reuse. Now, resources, what we're trying to do here is stem the tide of the heavy emphasis on pulling resources out of the ground, new resource generation. The idea is to reduce the primary extraction of resources through different methods and means, and emphasize retaining valued materials by reusing them in an integrated fashion. So we started dematerializing. Okay, let's not have as much stuff. Let's not put out as much waste. That's the zero waste. Eco-efficiency. How can we do things with less energy, less product? All the way working down as we get to it, like resource efficiency, and ultimately the circular economy, where what we have now, once used, we're beginning to reuse it, and we have reduced the pyramid from a large green on the left-hand side to where it should be on the right-hand side, where we're recycling and reusing as much as possible. Now, I'm going to focus here on the wastewater aspect of this, but there's lots of waste that comes out of these different areas. I call them the residuals. We should not call them waste. I find that these are resources, and when we use the wrong terminology, we tend to put it into a category we ought not. So it really is a resource factory, what we're talking about. These residuals that are sent to these treatment plants can be productively reused. For example, primary treatment can result in a lot of good primary sludge, which is rich in carbon that can be reused for multiple purposes. When we digest the solids, we produce a gas, biogas. It is, you can generate green electricity from the burning of these renewable gases. The properly stabilized sludge can be reused on farm fields where it's put back into production. Nutrients, we are now extracting nitrogen and phosphorus so that it can be selectively be put back out on the lands as can be used. More importantly, there's water. And as we're experiencing this year, a drought year, we have a lot of water going back into the rivers and going for irrigation and other purposes. It has tremendous value, and of course it's disinfected to make sure it's properly sterilized so that it can be used and not impact public health. Now the upper triangle here is a very important triangle where we talk about integrated resource recovery, reuse, recover, recycle. How can we find value for these products and not let them go into the landfill or some non-productive area? So this is the focus, is that when we send these resources to this resource recovery factory, how can we put it back productively into the mainstream? Now this is where we start getting into what we talk about integrated resource planning. What we do is we start looking at where are we today? Why have we done what we've done today? What are the drivers, and what are we looking at in the future? So we need to start looking ahead in the future to start looking at our investments in the next 5 to 10 years and use that as our guiding principle. Not to say, oh, we need to expand, rather than let's look at why we need to expand or upgrade and look at the factors in advance so that we are building our businesses, supply chains, resources in such a way that it is sustainable to the future. So we need some formalized strategies to make good and timely investments in this. Now, the other part to this is that the public needs education as to what is required. We as industry leaders need to get that messaging out to them, but also I'll have in our listening ears, we do have a very well-educated population out there that is now sounding the bell saying, we want better, we need to do better. Now, this example here, what is the perfect wastewater treatment plant? Well, the perfect wastewater treatment plant is there's no waste. It is a true resource recovery facility. So, and that is the fundamental basis of the circular economy is sustainability. Now, earlier I had a chance to chat with some of the members of the Food and Beverage Committee here, talking about we're at what we call sustainable. That means we're doing what we need to keep our systems balanced. Well, that's not good enough. We have to start thinking about what we call about the regenerative economy. There are things that we have damaged in the past that how we put them back into productive service. So we need to start looking at the lens because the demands will continue to rise, and the more that we can regenerate, the more that we can service these demands in a very eco-friendly and a cost-effective manner. So moving forward from that, I'll get into some of the discussion now. Let's talk about sludge. A lot of sludge in manure is generated from human activities, animal husbandry, those type of things. Well, it's really a rich source of carbon. And when we look at carbon, it is a fuel. And when we can go through digestion here, when I'm talking about anaerobic digestion, it creates a biogas, which now has hydrogen sulfide in it, carbon dioxide, and methane. Well, we look at those as the CO2 and methane as greenhouse gases. Now, hydrogen sulfide is actually another product that we can create farm-grade sulfur from. So even though it has a putrid smell to it, properly treated and reused, it's great for putting back on the fields as farm-grade sulfur. Carbon dioxide, we can capture it and use it in greenhouses. And methane, of course, is the foundation for renewable gases. So there's a lot of green fuels and opportunities here. And I've witnessed all of these where we go to the cogeneration of combined heat and power. Fuel cell technology, and that is based on biogas. The fuel cell technology is refined, which is refined natural gas or renewable natural gas that is highly purified. And just so you understand, fuel cells were the technology that were on the Apollo missions that they took to the moon and elsewhere. Clean, powerful energy. We had this technology years ago. However, we chose to go down a different path. The RNG stands for renewable natural gas. It basically creates natural gas rather than pulling it out of the ground. And the bus beneath that, which is compressed natural gas, I actually did see this bus when I was in London. They do have this, and you kind of get a joke where these people are powering the bus with their poop, but it's real. It comes to that. We have lots of sources of carbon that we can use, and looking at it from the lens of how can we reuse it, it brings a lot of great value back, especially to the food and beverage industry. Now, this is a very interesting project, which I happen to be part of. It's just outside Washington, D.C. They bring the sludge from 4 other large wastewater treatment plants to this location where it converts the sludge into energy and a reusable resource, is what we refer to as Class A biosolids, odorless and highly sterilized, fully stabilized. This is the kind of stuff that smells like earth. When the farmers get this material, they just love it. It has significant value in terms of nutrient value as well as soil texturing. Now, as part of this, the biosolids go through this digestion process where the gases are collected, they're conditioned, converted into renewable natural gas, which is pumped back into the natural gas pipelines, or converted into heat, which they can use on site, or electric power, which they can put out into the grid. Now, this project here was built for 235 million US dollars. That's 350 million Canadian. This is the kind of project I would love to be able to establish here in Manitoba and say, look, we have this opportunity for a win-win-win situation where we're taking these residuals and turning it into something that we can all benefit from. It's a green energy, and I think we have the opportunity to do that here. Phosphorus recovery. Now, we talked about, I don't know if you're familiar with the expression peak phosphorus. There was a concern that we were going to run out of phosphorus on a worldwide basis, and this precious resource was going to limit how much farming we could do and grow plants. So someone was quite clever and figured out how to extract this phosphorus source from wastewater and turn it into a pure crystal. Crystals, they call them struvite, magnesium ammonium phosphate, which is a slow release fertilizer, so it has a nitrogen value to it. This plant, this is another plant that I had worked on. This is out at the Gold Bar wastewater treatment plant, and it is a state-of-the-art facility that generates these 1,000 one-ton bags each year. This material now is being put back out to, I guess, the industries that can use primarily farming and others. So this is a good example of phosphorus recovery from wastewater, and we have a lot of wastewater plants. It just shows you that there's a lot of elemental use we can get out of it. Something you don't really think about, sanitary grit. Again, at the Edmonton wastewater treatment plant, they call this the odorous grit. This is the stuff that they suck out of the pipes and wet wells that accumulates in it, and it's this gritty material. Well, this facility was designed to wash that material and recover the grit and the organics associated with that grit. So we get clear grit, and there's a little bit of junk that does come out of that. It just happens. But we went to Europe to take a look at what was being done there, and in Germany, they do not allow you to put this kind of material into landfills unless it's less than 3% organics. Well, as you can see here on the slide, with this facility, the clean product in the end is about 0.3%, and I guess the contractors love this material. It's like putting under your patio blocks the material that you level your stones with. They come and get it by the truckload for free. So we wash it, we clean it. It doesn't go into landfills, taking up valuable space. So it's another view of how a resource was not looked at in the proper lens, but once you do see it, you're saying, well, yeah, why can't we recover that? Well, let's go to one of the most important resources, water. During our drought cycle, and I really do sympathize with our farmers and agribusiness to the south of Manitoba and in Saskatchewan, it's been a bad dry year for them. We're not getting the production. Now, we have the ability through membrane technology to create an ultra-high pure water, in fact, even through reverse osmosis, so it's drinking water quality. The technology exists. And it is a small footprint. It's a numerous locations. And what I'm showing here in the background, this facility is actually in Kananaskis. It's a beautiful location. And why was it built there? Well, it's discharging into the mountain streams, highly pure mountain streams, so they cannot afford to put these nutrients into it. They need to keep it as pristine as possible. Now, that same technology we're using elsewhere in different treatment plants, in water plants. So we can now take what you see on the bottom here, which would be your dirty wastewater that comes in, and by the time it comes out here, it literally is drinking water. You can, with the technologies that exist today, remove those elements and get it to the point where you can reuse it. So again, looking at the need here and growing the agro-business in Manitoba or Saskatchewan, water is such an essential item, and we can take a look at how we can best reuse it for these purposes. Energy. The less we use, the less we need. We're looking at how to optimize more efficient systems. Again, for manufacturing, pennies on the dollar, but yet it's less demand on our resources for natural gas and other power. So we're not putting those demands and stresses on our resources, but finding ways how to find that balance. Now, what we're looking at wastewater treatment plants is the concept called energy neutral, so that we generate as much energy as what we use. We're now looking at it as energy positive. We have the ability to be a net exporter of energy. And once we get to that point, then we'll be able to use the wastewater treatment plants or resource recovery facilities. So every time you hear a wastewater treatment plant, think of the word resource recovery facility. We will now be able to put nutrients and other energies back into the system for productive use. Now I'm going to get on some really cool topics here, and the concept of biomimicry, which is basically following what did Mother Nature do, and can we use it as a good example of how we should be building our systems or looking at it from a different level other than these hard mechanical chemical facilities. What can we do that mimics the patterns that Mother Nature has shown us along the way? And here's an example of the hydroponics. Now, this goes even further, where we can also have an aquaculture going with it. So where they're looking at how did Mother Nature do this? And we start looking at the root systems, they're going, well, that's interesting. So why don't we create biofibers that mimic how they collect the nutrients or clean the water out of systems? So I'm going to give credit to the source of these. And these all come back to what's called the living machine. We're getting much better at understanding how our natural systems have behaved and how we can use them to our benefit, especially in producing food in terms of new settings. Let me get to that. When we look at the conventional treatment of wastewater, we see these big treatment plants, and they filter and they do some chemical processes, some biological processes. But now we're starting to look at algae as a tertiary treatment, where they're pulling up all those other nutrients that can be recycled more productively for other uses, in terms of algae-based plastics, nutrients, the oils for energy. So what we're sending out in our wastewater, now we can use other principles from nature to extract those very valuable resources. And these are live projects, by the way. The images are real, and these are systems that we have worked on in promoting, especially as you can see here in very arid areas where water is extremely precious. Now, moving forward, we have the three fundamental pillars of sustainability. One is resource recovery, driving circular economy, the biomimicry inspired by nature, and social dimensions. As you can see, this is based on a number of balanced pillars. However, the pillars are in the wrong direction. We have the technology to recover resources. We have the examples from Mother Nature. We have the science. We have to change our behavior patterns and become more socially acceptable, that what we're going to be recovering, how we're going to be doing it, is driving that. So the more people we have on board, the better chance we have of being a very successful society and reducing our resource demands. This image here is intended to just show you that the vast majority of our material is coming out of the ground with very little bit of it being recycled. What we need to do now is get away from this trend of continued mining and resource extraction processes to how can we utilize our resources and drive that demand for replacement of those elements or substances that we cannot replace. We need to start looking at what can we recycle and minimizing the demands on our planet here. So I'm just going to summarize this right now. There's a lot of uncertainty. That's the new norm. We're dealing with climate change. We're dealing with supply chains. You throw a pandemic in there and all of a sudden all the systems that we were so accustomed to have been disrupted. So there's uncertainty. We're having to deal with that and how best to handle it. We talk about technology must be disruptive, and we talk about disruptive, it means we have to start looking at it from a different lens. We can't keep using the same technology to do the same thing. We're looking at better technology, like 150%. We're reducing energy demand by 90%. When I talk about disruptive, I mean it in a good way. It removes those, I'm going to say, perverse ways that we do business now and creates a much more sustainable method. And again, our treatment plant, every time you see wastewater, it's a resource recovery facility. Change the paradigm of thinking. If you change your words, you will change your paradigm of thinking. What the real challenge we have here is how much time do we have to do this? The longer we wait, the more we're put in the corner, and we will not be able to do this cost effectively, nor can we respond in time. So the urgency, as you hear now, we're ringing the alarm bells now. So part of this, the paradigms must change. The way we have done, and we were looking for a paradigm shift in terms of looking for the circular economy or the regenerative economy as our driving principles. And obviously, there's going to have to be stretch here. We're going to have to work as a team. We have to go beyond those fence lines we've created for ourselves to get to those full benefits. So we're at this situation now. The key takeaway message is we need to start reducing the demand on our resource for the primary extraction. Our economic growth and environmental impact have to be de-linked. We want to be able to have a healthy economy and healthy environment, not one sacrificing the other. What we're talking about here is in terms of primary resource recovery. It's the principle of the circular economy. Let's reduce the demands on our extraction and focus in on what we can recover. We talk about displacement and the environmental impacts of that. Now, the most interesting one here is the political will, and research is essential for this. We're in a group of very knowledgeable people, and all realizing that as we pull together and find the right way, to develop our circular economy, we're going to need some help from our senior political folks and those with the ability to do the deep research necessary to keep doing this in a more efficient and cost-effective manner. Now, I would like to give acknowledgements to Dr. Art Umbel. He's our global practice leader in Stantec, and I speak with him on if not on a daily basis, at least 2 or 3 times a week. We have Dr. Mayran Antela, probably one of the smartest guys I know. He's down in the States, and when I have a problem I can't solve, this is my go-to fellow. And Carla, well, she's an excellent researcher. If you ever need to find something, this educated woman is probably second to none in terms of finding that information. So with that, I'll leave it open for questions.
Nick. Hi, Nick.
Hi there.
Oh, yeah. Somebody from Dawn wanted to know, would the effluent membrane filtration tech be an efficient and cost-effective option to creating RO water for industry use?
We have looked at that in many applications, and it really comes down to what kind of water quality they have and what type of source they're treating. But yes, it can be. In fact, The Gold Bar wastewater treatment plant in Edmonton is now putting in membrane technology to clean the water up sufficiently so that it can actually be sold to industry. So the short answer is it can be done, but we'd have to look at the case specifics.
So if you want to send chats, you can. If you want to raise your hands, by all means, please pop on. Maybe I'll start off and ask sort of from the perspective of our members, you gave some examples of some really big infrastructure projects. Are there things that, say individual companies can do kind of more on site at a smaller scale that can help them? In the food industry, water is often used for everything from washing to the actual processing, to various aspects of sort of adding quality to the foods that they're looking at. Are there things that companies can do kind of on that maybe smaller scale where they can participate in that mind shift as well and begin to see some of the benefits within their own processes? Or is this something that the economies of scale at this point are better left to these large infrastructure projects?
Well, I'll start off with the most fundamental one, water conservation. Is that many industries, well, water's expensive to produce. It's a resource that we're extracting from different locations, especially during a drought. There will be limits on that. So water conservation is something that we can practice by more efficient devices for water delivery, whether it's for cleaning or for those applications. The other thing we also do are energy audits. We look at the businesses and say, well, can we find more efficient ways for you to run your business so it's more cost effective rather than the outdated, electrical mechanical equipment you're using or things. It's more than just changing light bulbs. We look at where the big power consumptions are. And lastly, recycling, and that's always one of those things where we look at what can we reuse first. What don't we have to throw out? And we find that is even from the home standpoint, is that when you start looking at how can I work on a thinner budget? How can it be more practical? I think the same kind of thing comes with these industries. To put out a global statement, I would have to basically spend some time with the industry, understand their needs, and then come up with an industrial plan with them that makes the most sense in terms of resource recovery. I'm working with certain clients right now that I'm doing that exactly. And the beauty behind that is we have a repertoire of clients that we're doing this for different types of industries. So when we talk to, say, a distillery, or we talk to a potato manufacturer, or we talk to producing honey or milk, we can reach into our grab bag of where we worked elsewhere and help them with that. So we try to customize it as much as possible so it's the most meaningful benefit in terms of where they make those investments. I'm going to switch to this slide because this one here is always quite provoking in terms of provocative.
Okay. Hi, Nick. Okay, so
Hi.
Someone else asked regarding the phosphorus recovery systems. One, what type of wastewater treatment plants are able to implement this? And two, do you know if recovery is less energy intensive than mining?
Phosphorus recovery, one of my favorite topics. It's usually the medium to larger size mechanical plants that are most primed for this. This is where we have these decentralized treatment plants, and if we were to regionalize, we could then start looking at on a regional scale, just like the Piscataway bioenergy. To do them individually, it becomes very cost ineffective, but when you start to pool your resources to bring them together, it becomes much more cost effective to do that. Now, the mine, this is the perverse part about phosphorus. Is it cheaper to buy it as we mine it, or is it better to pay the price now and have it recovered as an element? And the challenge we're going to face there is that it's like the laws of supply and demand. It's going to come up for the next 10 years, you might just say, well, we can get phosphorus really cheap from mining. But in the 11th year, all of a sudden the price of phosphorus jumps by 2 or 3 or 10-fold. And are you prepared for those systems? So if you don't make those investments now, you could be tagged much later. We're not thinking about it's 10 years away. Well, we'll deal with it then. And going, no, that's the wrong philosophy. If we don't start looking at it now and prepare for those kind of impacts, how have we future-proofed for that transition when that resource becomes scarcer? And then that's when the laws of economy start to kick in, the laws of supply and demand, where you're paying much more money for something that had you invested in today, which would come at a lower cost. So the short answer to that is that yes, we can get phosphorus at times cheaper now, but we're moving towards where we can offset those costs cost effectively with the technologies. And I'm working with certain technologies now, and phosphorus recovery from wastewater treatment plants is becoming the new norm.
Okay, thanks, Nick. So another question we have is, do we know the carbon emission of recovery versus mining?
Carbon emission versus mining. Are they talking about the carbon at
carbon
the
emissions of recovery? Sorry, carbon emissions of recovery versus mining.
Well, let me go back to this particular slide because it'll help put it into context. So when we're recovering this nutrient factory here, the carbon that comes into this plant is either put back out as primary sludge, which can be used for other purposes, or it can be used in digestion. And the gases that are created are reused. So we can actually take a wastewater treatment plant and make it carbon zero, which means that we're not emitting carbon beyond, it's being reused. So there is a lot of efficiencies here that can be had simply by looking at it as a resource factory and maximizing every part of it. So the short answer is we can recover nutrients, and we can do it in a very carbon efficient way.
So I have another question here, Nick. Thanks. Is phosphorus recovery a private sector driven or a public sector driven project?
I'm going to use this expression, both. Yes, by all means. We should all be conscious that phosphorus recovery is very important, and our financial systems need to recognize how can we do this most cost effectively. So it's in all our best interest to view it as phosphorus recovery, both from a public-private standpoint.
I think Mike Fernandez has a question.
Hi there. Can you hear me okay? I have low connectivity, so I'm buffering a little bit, so that's why my camera's off. You can hear me okay? Okay,
yes.
Well, thank you. And thanks, Nick, for that. I appreciate the presentation, the information you provided. I guess one of my questions is a lot of the businesses in the industry group, or this particular sector, small, medium-sized enterprises, they don't always have the ability to do some of these big-scale projects, and they're reliant on the municipal systems for this, especially in Manitoba here. Any thoughts or ideas or tips or your experience working with industry and municipalities on some of these projects? Most of the work I do is with at the municipal level and policies. So it's interesting to hear from you how you see this moving forward, especially with this sector and the discussions around wastewater and municipalities and all these wonderful opportunities that are ahead of us.
The wastewater, the actual liquid part, is always a bit of a challenge. We do have some large urban centers, lots of small lagoons out there in terms of water reuse and what it means. I do think regionalization does make a lot of sense to centralize these treatment facilities where it's not cost prohibitive, but and that's where the challenge is where we do have a lot of communities that tend to be more rural, And we do have the cluster like the metropolitan region, which is around the city of Winnipeg, or around urban centers like Portage or Brandon. And I do think that it does make sense where we can regionalize as much as possible. Now, on that note, is one of the discussions we had with the Winnipeg metropolitan region is that there's a lot of lagoons out there, and there's a lot of sludge in those lagoons. And at some point, there's going to come a point where they got more than what they can handle, and where they're going to take it for treatment, and what to do with it. And that goes back to the point of this, the Piscataway Bioenergy Project. Where is that now? Right here. They suffered this. They had the same situation happening in just outside Washington, D.C. So when they centralized and brought it to a central facility, this made a lot of sense. So if we can do that with our liquid streams as well, where it's not cost prohibitive, we've got lots of miles of piping that would have to be put in and so forth. But there are certain aspects to what I do believe, like with the sludges and how they're treated, this could be a good start to those, like you say, different municipalities. The liquid stream, well, we'll have to have a much bigger discussion, and I'm sure that when I talk to the Winnipeg metropolitan region, they're thinking the same thing as how do places like Selkirk and how does like Winnipeg and others maximize their facilities. So there are some challenges here. So I don't think I can give you a complete answer to it, but I think the discussions of looking at regionalization makes a lot of sense.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah, the work I do is mostly along the lines of waste management and recycling and packaging and all those different pieces. So it's interesting to hear that it's a similar kind of challenge in many ways with the wastewater treatment. But I do think that that is the challenge for Manitoba, is how do we find policies and programs and initiatives that we can move forward on medium-sized scale or large scale or small scale, all the different variations, and yeah, these are good examples of that. So I appreciate it. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm going to add one point to that, and this is where leadership, the political leadership, is so important for us to get our messages to them and work with them on the policy development and developing that leadership. So thank you. I think that's an excellent point for us to follow up on.
How important is it, Nick, to have some of these sort of, because again, I mean, just to sort of rip off of this small to medium size, because I mean, we certainly notice that with our members, a lot of them are on that sort of smaller size. But I think about examples like with, potato processors, for example, right? Potato processors they're preparing maybe something for French fries, for a frozen product. They're washing their potatoes, they're doing all this kind of stuff, and they have this incredible amount of wastewater, whatever opportunity, however we want to frame it, right? And it's full of starch. And that's a really interesting example where a sort of an industry has kind of emerged out of that, where they're recovering that starch through certain technologies and are now creating a product that can be sold for the gluten-free sort of baking industry, for other sort of things as this, pure potato starch. How do we sort of, I guess, like, in your opinion, what is the most important step for some of these? Because some of these companies may not be able to invest in that, but how do you begin to sort of, I guess, promote these kinds of things so that that mental shift happens and people begin to, I guess, break down some of those boundaries of competition, of business, and begin to collaborate and look at these opportunities to sort of say, hey, I'm generating this. How, maybe I don't have the facilities to do that, but how do I partner with someone who might be able to do, to bring value to this waste stream?
That's where we do come in and help these industries. The first thing is they have to have a desire, willingness to look at their processes and say, is there a better way of doing this? There's a more efficient way of doing this. And we can help them look at that, and based on our experience of other locations, or look at sometimes an opportunity will come up that nobody's seen before, but through discussions with them is to realize what could be very specific and unique to their organization. So it's like when we do an energy audit, we go in with a very an open mind in terms of where the big opportunities are and where we can help them. And on occasion, we do come up with something innovative and creative as well, which is very unique to the organization. So the first part would be to sit down with the organizations, understand their challenges, and see if there's something we can do for them cost effectively now, or at least give them some guidelines so that if it's not this decade, at least they provision for a decade down the line, that they have started to look ahead and saying, well, it may not be cost effective today, but in 5 years from now, as long as we were prepared for it, we can go down that path. So it's opening those discussions at this point early, and then being very specific to the industry and working with them.
Does anyone have any more questions for Nick? Okay. Okay. I think we're ready, Mike. Oh,
Yeah.
Oh wait. Yeah. Someone has a question. Ben.
I'm just thinking maybe it's time we approach the Minister of Agriculture, right? And I mean, Nick, this is actually the first time I saw your presentation, and it's quite it makes you think, right? It makes you think, and I think, you know, with the Food and Beverage Association, I assume Michael, you're part advocacy as well, as part of your mandate, and maybe we should ask for a meeting with Minister Eichler, and he might choke on it at first, but you know, we should at least present how other jurisdictions are dealing with some of these opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really good point, Ben. I mean, I think some of this is, you know, some of these things are really accessible on the level of individual companies. There are things that they can do that are going to make business sense that they can invest in. But I think some of these absolutely are sort of beyond the scope. And I think as we're sitting here struggling with, you know, a historic drought, you know, that is in some ways limiting the ability of this. Like I think about what is going on in Portage la Prairie right now, where there's a couple of, you know, major pea processors that are trying to create a bit of a circular economy with some of their waste, but can't because of limited access to water. It really struck me with what you said here, Nick, around that. And I think this is sort of a role for organizations like our own to sort of look at that and say, there are opportunities here, and some of them are beyond the scale of individual companies and do require that kind of much more collective approach to be able to sort of make that make sense. And so, you know, I think your point, Ben, is well taken. So, Nick, if that's it, I want to thank everybody for joining us here today, for taking your lunch hour and learning a little bit about this. Nick, this was great. I learned quite a bit here in this process. And if anybody has any other follow-up questions, by all means, send it to our team. We can connect you with Nick and with others. And I want to thank you for taking the time to share your lunch hour with us today.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity. And if anyone has additional questions or follow-up, feel free to contact me through you, and I'd be more than happy to follow up with them on some questions. Sometimes these questions, they'll kind of germinate in your mind and they'll spring up at 10 o'clock at night going, oh, I wish I would ask that. So I'm more than happy to entertain some questions after this, where we're done here.
Excellent. Thank you so much.